"I'm sorry, sir. This way is for invited guests only." I stopped in the middle of the snow-covered courtyard, still holding that old wooden box in my hand, while luxury cars slid past me as if I didn't exist. Inside that brightly lit mansion dressed up for Christmas, my son was throwing the party he liked to call the achievement of his life. No one there knew that the key in the pocket of my worn-out coat was the only thing that had the right to close that house tonight. Before I go on, if you're listening to this story, and you can already feel the cold from the very first moments, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Because from that moment on, nothing I'm about to tell you is just an ordinary Christmas party anymore. I didn't say a word when the guard stepped in front of me, raising his hand as if I were a mistake that needed to be corrected immediately. I just nodded, took half a step back, letting the snow keep falling onto my worn coat. Elena stood beside me, her hand gently tightened around my arm, a habit she'd built over many years whenever things started to slip off course. I could hear Christmas music drifting out from inside, warm, loud enough to drown out the uncomfortable whispers right behind us. "You're at the wrong place," a woman's voice said. Clear, calm, no need to raise it. I turned around and saw Victoria Hamilton. She was wearing a deep red dress, the kind of color that works under bright lights, but not on people. Her eyes swept over us the way someone inventories old furniture. When they stopped at the wooden box in my hands, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "We don't accept handmade gifts here," she said. "Italian marble floors are very hard to clean." I looked down at the box. It wasn't big. It wasn't heavy. I had polished the wood again just last week, so carefully that Elena told me I was overdoing it. Inside was something small, something I had kept for many years, waiting for the right moment. I thought tonight was that moment. I was wrong. Victoria gestured to the guard. "Take them around the side, the staff entrance." She said it the way someone rearranges chairs, not the way you speak about two people standing right in front of you. I heard Elena inhale softly. She didn't object. She was used to this. For years now, whenever we stepped into places like this, she always chose silence, not because she was weak, but because she believed keeping the peace was the only way we might still see our son. Chloe appeared just then. My daughter-in-law. She looked at us, then glanced around as if afraid someone might notice. "Dad, Mom," she said quietly, but didn't come any closer. "There are a lot of guests tonight. Everyone here is a friend of the Hamilton family. Maybe you could sit outside for a bit." I didn't answer right away. I looked past her shoulder, into the main hall. The Christmas tree stood nearly touching the ceiling, decorated so extravagantly I couldn't even recognize the scent of real pine. Crystal glasses passed from hand to hand, smiles carefully practiced. In the center of it all, Caleb stood beside Franklin Hamilton, a drink in his hand, listening, nodding again and again. He looked nothing like the boy who used to sit next to me in my old pickup truck, asking why our house never got any bigger. "He doesn't belong in a place like this," I heard Chloe say to someone behind her, thinking she was whispering. "Just look at him. So unsophisticated." That sentence didn't hurt me. It only confirmed something I had known for a long time. I turned to Elena. She avoided my eyes, looking down at the polished stone floor beneath our feet, where our reflections were so faint they almost didn't exist. Victoria turned back, this time impatient. "I believe I've made myself clear. This is a private party. If you wish to stay, please remain in the proper area." I nodded. Not to her, but to myself. I stepped aside, close to the cold stone wall. As I did, my coat pocket brushed against my hip. I felt the familiar shape of the smart key. It had been there since I left home. Not out of habit, but because I knew I would need it. I looked around the mansion once more. The vanes in the stone staircase, the lighting layout in the hallway, even the wall clock I had once considered replacing, and then decided to keep. Everything was right. Too right. So right that I didn't need to ask anything else. Caleb finally noticed us. His eyes met mine for a second, then slid away. He turned back to Franklin, smiled, said something I couldn't hear. Maybe he was talking about the house, the one he proudly claimed he bought all by himself. I noticed his hand tightening around the glass, the same way it used to whenever he lied as a child. I didn't step forward. I didn't call his name. I stood still, as if waiting for something to happen. Outside, the snow fell thicker. Inside, the laughter grew louder. And in the middle of all that I realized a truth so cold, it was almost shocking. I was being pushed out of the very house I had never truly left. I let out a slow breath, not to calm myself, but to make sure I still had enough patience for what was about to come. I stayed there a few more minutes, long enough for no one to notice us anymore. When people believe you don't belong, they quickly turn you into old furniture. Elena gently tugged at my hand. She didn't need to say anything. I knew she wanted some air. We stepped out to the back porch where the cold wind made everything feel sharper, clearer. I looked at the snow-covered garden and suddenly remembered the first time I stood on an empty construction site 40 years ago. It was just as cold. All I had were my hands, an old hard hat, and a simple belief that if you worked long enough and treated things right, the ground would pay you back fairly. No one at that party knew that, and I had made sure they didn't. I never wanted Caleb to grow up in my shadow. When he went to college, I didn't sign a single check. I set up an investment fund instead, letting the money take a long way around, far enough for him to believe he was on his own. When his first company ran short on capital, I did the same thing. The money arrived on time, without my name attached. I thought that was fair. But fairness isn't always understood. Caleb always talked about me as a retired bricklayer. He said it to friends, to business partners, and tonight, surely, to the Hamilton family. I heard Franklin telling someone how proud he was to have guided his son-in-law, bringing him into the circle he truly belonged to. I didn't step in to correct that story. I wanted to see how far it would go. Elena asked me softly, barely more than a breath. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I was okay, in the way someone gets used to standing in the background. But inside me one question kept repeating. When did simplicity become a flaw that needed to be hidden? I remembered the first time Caleb brought Chloe home. I saw her eyes scan our small house, lingering on the things that weren't new enough. She was polite, but the distance was obvious. From that day on, the calls came less often. Then Chloe mentioned that her parents valued image very highly. Caleb didn't say much after that. He just told me everything would be fine if I let them handle things. And I did, for too long. From the back porch, I heard laughter inside, turn into applause. Franklin was probably telling another story about his family legacy. I had looked up that name a long time ago, not out of suspicion, but out of professional habit. Debt records, loans nearing maturity, assets transferred in a hurry, a picture that didn't match the tailored suits they were wearing tonight. Elena looked at me, her eyes tired. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at the glass door, reflecting two people standing at the edge of their own son's party. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came because I needed to be sure of one thing, whether my silence had been mistaken for weakness. When we went back into the hall, the air felt heavier. I heard Chloe talking about a future that matches their level. I saw Caleb nod. He nodded very quickly, as if slowing down might force him to think. I remembered the way he nodded when I asked if he was sure about selling the old truck to pay tuition. He nodded the same way back then. I walked slowly inside, not to push forward, but to look more closely. Every face around me was playing a role. Some played it well, some didn't. I realized I had grown too familiar with spotting the small cracks in stories told too smoothly. Franklin caught my eye. He looked me up and down, then turned away, as if he needed no more proof for a conclusion already made. Victoria was different. She looked at me longer. For a brief moment, something like uncertainty crossed her face. Then it was quickly replaced by contempt. She didn't like things that couldn't be neatly categorized. I heard someone ask Caleb how long he had owned the mansion. Caleb smiled and gave a nice round answer. I knew the real number. I knew the exact day the contract was signed. I knew because I had thought long and hard before putting my name down. Not because of the money, but because of the location. Aspen doesn't forgive rushed decisions. Elena lightly touched my hand. That small gesture pulled me back to the present. I noticed my heartbeat was steady. I wasn't angry in the way they might have expected. I was simply watching. And in that watching, I saw one thing clearly. Caleb wasn't being deceived only by the Hamiltons. He was deceiving himself. I turned and walked down the hallway. Each step carried me past old memories, past decisions I had kept, hidden to protect my son. I wondered whether hiding the truth had truly made him stronger, or if it had only made it easier for others to build a stage and lead him across it. When I stopped in front of the library door, I heard a low argument inside. Not loud, but tense enough to slip through the crack. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there listening and realized something simple and unavoidable. Every polished surface has a place where it begins to peel, and when it does, it doesn't take force. It only takes time. I stood still in front of the library door for a few seconds, not out of curiosity, but because I had learned to wait for the truth to reveal itself. When the voices inside dropped lower, I gently pushed the door open, as if I had simply wandered in by accident. Franklin Hamilton had his back to me, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice was sharp now, stripped of the smooth tone from earlier. "I told you. After Christmas," he whispered, tense enough for me to hear. "Don't push me right now. This house can't be touched yet." The words hung in the air. I looked around the library, tall shelves, carefully arranged. But most of the books were matching hardcovers, bought in sets. Things meant to look impressive, not to be read. I stood by one shelf, my hand brushing the spine of a book placed upside down. A small detail, but a familiar one. People who truly live in their homes don't shelve books like that. Franklin turned around. His eyes met mine, startled for a split second, then quickly back under control. He covered the phone and forced a smile. "What do you need? I'm looking for the restroom," I said. My voice was steady, nothing suspicious. He nodded and pointed vaguely down the hall. When he turned back to his call, I had already heard enough. I left the library, but the words "can't be touched" yet followed me down the hallway. That's not how someone talks about their own property. That's how someone speaks when they're holding something that doesn't belong to them. Near the staircase, I saw Chloe standing with Victoria. They were speaking close heads, nearly touching. I wasn't trying to listen, but as I passed by, Chloe suddenly lowered her voice. "I told him the house was a gift from my parents," she said quickly. "We're only renting it for 2 days. Mom, don't let that slip." Victoria froze, her eyes widening for a second. Then she smiled, a smile carefully practiced. "Of course, no one needs to know the details." I kept walking. I didn't turn around. The pieces were falling into place faster than I expected. I stopped in front of a glass display case in the corner of the hall. Inside were a few antique jewelry pieces, each under its own light. I hadn't noticed them earlier, because I never thought I would need to. But now I saw it. A necklace with a pale blue stone, a small scratch along the right edge. I knew that scratch. I had traced it with my fingernail hundreds of times, whenever my mother took the necklace off before going to work. My heart didn't race. It slowed down. A cold, deliberate slowing. I didn't need to guess how the necklace ended up here. I remembered the day Caleb asked to borrow the key to the display cabinet, saying he wanted to clean up some old things. I handed it to him without questions. I thought that was trust. I didn't touch the glass case. I just stood there, looking at something that had been moved from its place without a single explanation. Elena came up beside me. She followed my gaze, then slowly shook her head, as if she understood. I saw her shoulders sink, not from loss, but from the confirmation of something she had always been afraid to name. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I did," I said, and that was all we needed to say to each other in that moment. Laughter swelled again behind us. Franklin was raising his glass, talking about an upcoming deal. I caught a few familiar terms used in the wrong places. The people around him nodded, not because they understood, but because they didn't want to look out of place. I realized I was standing in a room full of people afraid of being exposed as outsiders. Caleb walked over to me. He looked at me, then at the display case. His eyes lingered too long. "Dad, what do you think of the house? Spacious," I said, "and cold." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're always like that, Dad." I didn't say anything else. I didn't ask about the necklace. I wanted to hear him say it himself, if he still wanted to. Victoria approached, her voice sweet in a way that felt artificial. "Mr. Miller, if you're tired, we can arrange a car to take you home early." "Not yet," I said. "There are still a few things I want to see." She frowned slightly, but didn't argue. Maybe because she wasn't sure what I was looking at. I walked up the staircase slowly. Each step carried a thought. I no longer had any doubts. The Hamiltons weren't just wearing an image. They were using that image to cover cracks that were growing wider. And my son was standing right in the middle of those cracks, believing they were solid ground. On the second-floor hallway, I stopped by a window overlooking the snowy garden. The lights made everything look peaceful, almost artificial. I thought about the question Elena had asked me earlier. What was I going to do? I wasn't planning to cause a scene. I wasn't planning to humiliate anyone. I was simply going to stop being silent. Because when silence lasts too long, it stops being patience. It becomes complicity. I turned back toward the stairs, my hand brushing my coat pocket without thinking. The key was still there. It felt heavier than before. Not because of its weight, but because of what I knew now. I looked down into the hall, where the party continued, as if nothing had cracked, and I understood that the mask had begun to slip. The only question left was this: who would be the first to realize it had fallen? I was coming down the stairs, just as the music shifted to a familiar tune, repetitive melodies, soft enough to cover the unease spreading through the room. I walked slowly, not to draw attention, but because I wanted to see every face clearly as things moved past the point of return. Victoria was the first to step in my way. She moved directly in front of me, her smile gone. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice low but urgent, "I think you and your wife should leave now. There's been an unexpected security check. We don't want any misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. I'd heard that word many times in my life, usually when someone was afraid of being seen too clearly. I looked straight at her. "What kind of check?" "Paperwork," she answered quickly. "Just a procedure." Franklin appeared behind her, forcing calm. He placed a hand on Victoria's shoulder, a signal meant to end the conversation. "We'll handle this," he said to me, polite on the surface. "You should go home and rest. It's Christmas." I looked at them, then around the room. I saw Caleb standing a few steps away, his eyes unsettled. He didn't come closer. He was waiting to see what I would do, like watching a card about to be turned over. I realized I had been waiting for this moment longer than I thought. "I'm staying," I said. Just 4 words, but enough to make the room sink into silence. Victoria opened her mouth to speak again when the front door swung open. Cold air rushed in, along with 2 men in dark coats and a property manager I had known for many years. He stopped the moment he saw me. No hesitation. He gave a slight nod, small but unmistakable. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but as the room fell quiet, it landed like a knock. All conversation stopped. I heard the soft clink of a glass, then nothing. Franklin turned to the manager, his smile stiffening. "What's going on?" The manager didn't look at him. "We're here at the request of the owner." I stepped forward 1 pace, not to take the spotlight, but because all eyes had already moved to me. I took the key from my coat pocket and placed it on the nearest table. A simple action, yet enough for the manager to nod in confirmation. "This property," I said calmly, "is under a short-term lease. The contract clearly states conditions regarding misuse and false representation." Victoria stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I continued, "you were right about one thing. This place isn't meant for just anyone, especially not for people who look down on others to hide their own lack." Franklin stammered, trying to regain control. "You can't do this. We have an agreement." "I know," I said, "and I also know what information that agreement was signed under." The manager opened a folder. He didn't need to read it out loud. Its presence was enough. I looked at Caleb. His face had gone pale. He understood. Not every detail, but enough to know the picture he trusted was collapsing. "Dad," he said, stepping forward this time. "What are you doing?" I looked at my son. In his eyes I saw not only fear, but a late-arriving shame. "I'm closing a door," I said. "A door you walked through, without checking who was holding the hinges." Victoria stepped back. "This is excessive," she said. "No," I replied. "What's excessive is using someone else's money to build an image, then demanding respect from that image." I signaled to the manager. He nodded and gave a brief order to security. There was no shouting, no chaos, just controlled movement, a party slowly shrinking meter by meter. Franklin tried to speak about misunderstandings, about bad timing. I didn't listen. I'd heard enough in my life to know when words were only a way to delay the truth. Chloe stood still, her hands clenched. She looked at me, then at Caleb. For the first time, I saw real confusion on her face. Not because of material loss, but because she realized what she had been leaning on wasn't as solid as she believed. I walked over to the display case. The manager unlocked it. I took the necklace out and held it in my hand. It was cool, familiar. I turned to Caleb and placed it in his palm. "There are things you can't use to buy a place," I said, "and things you can't use to beg for acceptance." Caleb didn't speak. He lowered his head. For the first time that night, he was truly silent. The party was no longer a party. The lights were still on. The Christmas tree still stood there, but no one was performing anymore. I took one last look around. I didn't see victory. I saw a room that had just been given back its proper name. A home, not a stage. I turned and walked out of the hall. Elena beside me. The snow was still falling, as if nothing had changed. But I knew that from this moment on, no one in that house could keep pretending they didn't know where the truth had been standing all along. We didn't go far. Elena and I stopped at the back porch where the cold wind hit our faces head-on, sharp enough to clear the mind. Inside, everything was being wrapped up in an orderly way. No chaos, just a silence, spreading through the house, like when a room is finally lit the way it should have been all along. I stood watching the snow fall, thinking about the long road that had brought me here. Not a road of money, but a road paved with moments when I chose silence instead of speaking up. Elena stood beside me, her hand holding mine. She didn't ask anything. She knew. Tonight didn't need more answers. After a while, the property manager stepped outside and told me all necessary procedures were complete. Short and professional as always. I nodded. No more words were needed. I asked him to keep the service staff and invite them to stay, not as employees, but as guests. He looked at me surprised for a moment, then nodded again. We went back inside. The dining table was still set. The chairs were empty, but the room no longer felt like a display. I invited the staff to sit down. They hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. I told them it was Christmas, and no one should be left standing outside. They sat down one by one, the initial caution slowly giving way to relief. Caleb stood at the far end of the room. He watched the scene, his eyes reddening. He walked over slowly, as if each step required permission. "Dad," he said, his voice rough. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "You just need to see clearly." We sat at the table. No more glasses raised to impress. Just simple wishes, honest nods. Elena smiled at a young server and asked about her family. I saw the girl's expression soften. Small things like that. Sometimes they're all an evening really needs. Franklin and Victoria were gone. Chloe sat still, her hands resting on her knees. She wasn't crying. She was quiet, like someone who had just realized she had placed her trust in the wrong place. I didn't blame her. In the end, the responsibility still belonged to Caleb. After the meal, I stood up, not to make a speech. I simply said that this house would be closed to extravagant parties for a while. It needed to return to being a home. Everyone nodded. No one objected. I saw agreement in their eyes, without the need for debate. Caleb followed me back out to the porch. The snow had thinned. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I looked at my son. I saw the boy he once was, and the man learning how to stand upright. "No," I said, "but I won't shield you from the consequences of your choices anymore." He nodded. This time the nod was slow and heavy. "I understand." I handed him a business card. Not mine, but one from an old friend who works in community development. "If you want to start over," I said, "start by creating value, not an image." He took it and held it tight. "I'll try." The night went on. People left one by one, leaving the house quiet again. Elena and I stood under the Christmas tree. I took the necklace out and placed it back in her hand. She smiled, a relieved smile. Things that return to where they belong naturally find peace. Before leaving, I looked around the room one last time. No more flashy lights, just enough light. I thought about the question that had followed me all evening. What do you do when silence is mistaken for weakness? The answer, it turned out, wasn't about speaking louder. It was about speaking at the right time. I stepped outside with Elena. The snow fell, softly laying a fresh layer on the path. I knew there would be much to do tomorrow, with Caleb, with the family, with myself. But tonight, I allowed myself to stop. I looked into the darkness ahead and said not to anyone in particular. A home isn't the place with the most expensive marble. A home is where the truth is placed on the table, and people still have the courage to sit together. Elena squeezed my hand tighter. We walked on, leaving behind a house that was no longer a stage. And in that quiet, I felt Christmas finally arrive the way it was meant to. If you stayed with me until this moment, thank you for listening to the story of a father who chose silence for far too long. If this story gave you something to think about, please subscribe, like, and share, so honest family stories like this can reach more people. The lesson I've taken is simple. A person's value isn't found in appearances or the status they try to wear, but in honesty, gratitude, and how they treat those who laid the foundation of their life. Christmas and life itself become more meaningful when we dare to face the truth and hold on to what truly matters.